have 1 minute, and we're waiting for one more member to arrive, so bear with us. And hopefully we'll have 4 people. It is 7 o'clock. Maybe we'll start and just do a few administrative things and see if...
I've not heard from him, so I assumed he was going to be here.
Mike shows up.
Want to try calling him?
He usually shows up. I'm pretty sure.
Any whirlwind?
Well, if by the time we get to a hearing he doesn't, it'll be up to the applicants. So I'll call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock and ask for a roll call.
Roland Mayhew.
Here.
Ori Gibbs.
Here.
Suzanne Purley.
Here.
With the following not present: Mike Foote and Steve Bogert. Staff present is Dean Trefethen, Planning Director. And I, Robert Moore, will be taking the minutes.
Okay. And recording secretary, I'm not sure what that, what is it that you're going to do?
Just taking the minutes.
Okay, so Rob Mora is our recording secretary. Okay, great. Just for everybody that I'm not generally the chairman, but I'm filling in for our chairman tonight who's absent, so I'll do my best. And staff has already been introduced. We have minutes from the November 17th, 2017 meeting. Those were all sent to us and they've been reviewed. So if somebody wants to make a motion to accept, or do we have to make a motion to accept them?
Yeah.
I move we approve the minutes as written.
A second?
Okay, all in favor? All right. I just want to note that if anybody here in the audience is here for the 145 Daisy Gardner Road, that hearing has been moved to January. It will not be heard tonight. So you're free to go, Dave. And if anybody is here for Mountain Lake Village, that application has also been moved to the January meeting. So if anybody is here for that hearing, it will not be heard tonight. It will be heard in January. And the meeting in January will be on Tuesday, January 16th.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So, the Daisy Gardner Road was supposed to happen last month, because the month before, there wasn't enough folks on the board to do it. So it was advertised as being December 18th. When did that change?
It changed because, once again, what happened was Steve Bogert, the chairman, had a death in the family and announced that he couldn't be here unexpectedly. And so we had to notify all of the applicants and give them the opportunity to move their hearing if they want a 5-member board.
Okay.
And so
the date of the meeting in January?
it'll be the January, what did I just say?
16.
January 16th. It's a Tuesday because Monday's a holiday. All right? We are still short. And
Daisy Gardner tonight?
no,
I didn't think so.
no, I just said that one. That one's moved, and he was here for Daisy Gardner.
And Mountain Village.
In Mountain
That's
Village,
also
that's also gone. So, Steve, it's up to you if you want to proceed.
We'll proceed.
Okay, great. So just come forward, introduce yourself, and tell us about your project.
Madam Chair, zoning board members, Stephen Smith of Steve Smith and Associates. I'm here tonight representing Laconia Housing Authority on property located at 423 South Main Street. We're here under Article 235, Section 33, density. With me tonight is Daniel Luker, who is my right here. We'll be talking to you about the aspects of the variance and the 5 areas of the variance. I would like to start with a presentation of what the project is about, where it is, what the conditions are out there. Turn it over to Mr. Luker. I'm happy to answer any questions during my presentation or after you hear all of it. I have a small scale so you can have a little better view of the elevation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Again, I'm here representing the applicant and also representing Land Wild Holdings Limited Partnership, the owners of the property. They signed a document for me to come in and represent them also, which is basically the Volpe family. Again, the property is at 423 South Main Street, and I have several plans on the board. I'm gonna move this over here so you'll be able to hear me, and maybe it'll come out on the recording. The top plan I have is the existing conditions plan. The bottom plan is our proposed improvements plan. And of course, this is the elevation view of what the building will look like if we proceed with this project. The tax lot number is 442-14240. There's a total of 0.47 acres of land area, or 20,700 square feet. It's in the DRD, Downtown Riverfront District. The use that we are proposing is an allowed use in that district. The subject parcel itself was a part of the redevelopment, the Winnipesaukee Urban Renewal Project back in the late 60s to early 70s. The parcel that we're talking about here was within that area, and at that time, up until September of 2005, development within the Winnipesaukee Urban Renewal Project was solely the function of the Laconia Housing Authority, who is here before you tonight. The site itself was developed based on tax records in 1969, I think is when the building was constructed. It's located in this area here. Most of you are familiar that it was the former home of the Melcher & Prescott Insurance Company up until, I think, a couple of years ago. They moved across the street into the old telephone building across the street. The current building is a 3-story structure. There is 13,800 square feet of gross floor area within the facility itself. You can see the boundary line cuts down to the back to the corner. The rear portion of this property is actually owned by the Housing Authority, and that's their parking area back here. There are several easements on the property for access for the Laconia Housing Authority. There's a 75-foot access easement here. To get into their parking lot, there's an easement here in favor of the Melcher & Prescott property to get around to get into some existing parking that actually overlaps on from the boundary line itself. As you well can imagine, the current building doesn't meet current Boca code because it was built when it was built. It doesn't have any handicap accessibility into the building whatsoever. No sprinkler system, no fire suppression. Our proposal is to convert the existing building, the 13,800 square foot facility, into 16 independent living units for qualified senior citizens aged 62 and over. Our request is for 14 one-bedroom units and 2 two-bedroom units. The site, under the current zoning, would only allow 9 units. If we put 9 units in here, they would be roughly 15,000 square feet, and more than likely would be 2 to 3 bedrooms at minimum on the site itself. We're proposing to modify the parking in the rear. For the multifamily development we're proposing, the site currently contains 36 parking spaces that Melcher & Prescott building used to use in this area here. For our proposal, there's only a need for 24 parking spaces. We're proposing to add some handicap parking space in the back, create some green space, put a new access on the end of the building with a walkway around, have a handicap access in the back, which is in this area here. with a tower for an elevator, so we have handicap accessibility to all floors in the rear. We're proposing a turnaround in here for drop-off, and we have a handicap access ramp coming into the building. You can see that we're proposing to redo the facade of the building. This is facing Main Street, and if you remember, there's an entrance in this area here which would be removed. There is no entrance here, which will be added. In the rear of the building, which is this area here, down in this corner, there is a man door in this area here, which would be removed itself. The new elevator entrance area would be proposed to be constructed there with this handicap accessibility into the building. Additionally, the new proposed improvements would also bring the building up to current fire codes, which would include sprinkler system. We will be upgrading the water line coming into the building on this proposal. The sewer line will be upgraded in size. And when it was built back in the 60s, commercial buildings were allowed to have a 4-inch connection, and they've changed that, and they like a 6-inch connection, so that will be upgraded to 6-inch in this area here. We propose to do a few things in terms of stormwater drainage improvements on the site. It's our belief that the proposed use will be a less intense use, a reduction in traffic, a reduction in the requirement for parking. I did look at, in the review of this project, in our design aspects of it, we looked at other uses that would be allowed in this building under the zoning. The personal service professional office space with a single tenant would require 48 parking spaces to support this building. There's only 36 existing today. If they had a multi-tenant in the building, which is actually what Melcher and Prescott had, I think they occupied the 2nd and 3rd floor, and the lower floor, I know my accountant used to be in there, and there was a couple other businesses in there. Under multi-tenant, this particular building will require 53 parking spaces, and it only has 36. If you look at retail sales under 2,500 square feet, you would need 46 parking spaces to support retail sales, and the building's really not set up for retail sales with 3 stories. I don't think it'll function well. So our proposal would be to put the 16 units in here, upgrade the parking, provide the handicap access, construct some additions in the rear to provide that handicap access to the buildings. Again, it's our belief that this will be, even though we're asking for 16 units, there are 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom for qualified senior citizens. We believe, based on the records that have been kept by Laconia Housing Authority, that even though we have the 24 parking spaces we're proposed, many of these units probably would be occupied by people without vehicles. One of the things that's really in our favor for this site is that Laconia Housing is here, the support services are here, the management is here. There's already cross uses in the property that relate to Laconia Housing Authority itself. So we have done some reviews with staff, with department heads. I think I can reasonably say to you that this project meets all of the zoning standards with the exception of the request for the density that we're asking. And basically it comes because of the fact we got a 13,000 square foot building here. It's that we're trying to reuse and rehab and get it back into the marketplace and get functioning. It doesn't make sense, the demographics, 1,500 square foot apartments, 3-bedroom in this area, we think it's going to be more congestion at this intersection, and it would be a heavier use of this property, which we don't believe the property would handle. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Daniel, if I may, to talk about.
No, just
Or I
just a
can
question,
answer.
just a quick, so this is just totally restricted to eligible senior citizens? Is that low income and?
I would have to turn to Mr. Weaver, who is the director over there.
Okay.
He knows more about the operations than I do. Dick, if you'd like to come up.
Okay, sure. That's correct. It would be senior citizens only, 62 years of age and older. Our intention is to combine what we do currently at Sunrise Towers with several service programs we have focused to seniors only in this location. Primarily, seniors are eligible for the CFI program, which is a Medicaid waiver program that provides services to keep people out of nursing homes and in independent living. But these will all be independent apartments still, but we'll have services and meals available to them.
But in the building is strictly apartments? There's no other facilities in the building?
The ground floor is partially below grade, so on the backside towards Sunrise Towers, there'll be a community room and laundry facilities of
Okay.
that sort, but not
Yeah.
apartments.
But all related to the
Yes,
resident.
not-
Sure, right, okay. No, that makes sense. No, looks good. Okay, thank you. Unless anybody, did anybody else?
Excuse me, I have a couple of questions. You didn't answer the question about low income.
Yes, it would be targeted to be eligible for Medicaid. We're targeting persons of that level of income, which is approximately $15,000 per year is the maximum income that an individual can earn and be on Medicaid.
Would this property remain on the tax rolls?
Yes, it would. It would be
It does.
taxed fully as
Fully taxable?
whatever it's used, yes.
Okay. Anybody else? No? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Luca, we'll go over the actual variance itself.
Okay.
Good evening. Thanks for having us. I'm Dan Luker of Freddie Flaherty and Concord, who's longtime counsel to the Laconia Housing Authority.
Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
Greg?
Put the mic.
My bad. My bad. He stole it. This is a good project. We spent a lot of time on the application trying to lay out all the reasons why it should go. And I won't review the whole application, but I hope you've had a chance to read it. I think it's helpful to summarize the last of it. The last paragraph says the redevelopment of this property at 16 modestly sized dwelling units, nearly all of which will be occupied by a single senior citizen, very few of whom will have vehicles, will be a more functional and less intense use of the property, will have no adverse impacts on the city, school system, or traffic infrastructure, and will be in the public interest. Hopefully, as Steve said, it's a permitted use, and this is, in some respects, a technicality in the ordinance. The density limitation is designed to limit over-intense use of a property or of an area. We think the way it's written, and I sort of cut to the chase, so I'll get to it in a second, but the way it's written, you could have, without a variance, you could have 9 or 10 dwelling units as defined in the ordinance, which could be basically a household. And as Steve mentioned, if you put 1,500 square foot apartments here, you could have 3, 4, 5 people, at least 3 living in the 9 or 10 units. You do the math, that works out to high 20s or 30 people living there, many with vehicles. It's a much more intense use. So we think in this situation, it makes sense to waive that provision of the ordinance. I'd like to point out a couple things. In the city of Laconia's recently adopted hazard mitigation plan, they included a reference to senior citizens and the growing senior population here. They said the over 62s are 17% now. They figure 23% by 2020, 30% by 3030. And I think it's sort of a given, and it's pretty well documented that there is a shortage of suitable senior housing in this area. When you're, I'm getting towards senior, but you're really, it's when you're going to build new housing as opposed to existing housing, you build wide doorways, you build accessible bathrooms, you try to do it on the first floor. Ideally, have an elevator if there's more than one floor, but it's much more, you put handles on the doors instead of knobs. It's much more sort of user-friendly. The other neat thing that's happening here is, Mr. Weaver mentioned it, there's a program called Choices for Independence. The CFI program allows people with Medicaid to live on their own and have services brought to them as needed, which would be meals as needed, and with the Sunrise Towers right next door in the kitchen they could readily provide meals if needed, occasional nursing assistance. It lets people live independently with dignity, which we think is a mission worth pursuing. And the last thing I'll mention, it's in your packet, I hope you had a chance to read it. There was a pretty succinct letter from Robert Harrigan as the chairman of the Board of Commissioners of the Laconia Housing and Redevelopment Authority. He points out in 3 or 4 good paragraphs that it'll be affordable housing, there's a need for affordable housing, and it'll create 16 dwelling units that will be suitable for older folks and much better than almost anything else you'd find in the area with the existing housing supply. So if you get a chance, I'd ask you to look at that. And then lastly, I'd just like to run through the standards on a variance. You know, one, it's got to be not contrary to the public interest. We think this is obviously not that. It's in the community's interest to provide housing for qualified seniors. Safe housing, suitable housing. We also think it will enhance the site. It's sort of, in some respects, a gateway to the backside of Laconia, and it's certainly going to improve the looks of the site. If you compare what's there now to the new layout that Steve has come up with, it's pretty impressive. So we believe it's not contrary to the public interest. It's consistent with the spirit of the zoning ordinance in the sense that the purpose of a density limitation is to to avoid over-intense use of a site. And as I'll explain again in a little more detail, this will provide very, very low intense use of the site. Substantial justice is done. Same thing, we're going to provide much needed housing. It's in the public interest, and really no one's interest is being prejudiced here. We've got a good use of the site. We think it works. The 4th standard says there can't be any diminution in value of surrounding properties. We can't think of any evidence that there would be. It's going to be a much improved looking site. The landscaping is going to be better. We're maintaining the 25% green space. And again, I think it's got to improve the neighborhood, just aesthetically alone. Also, there'll be less traffic. So we don't think there's any argument that the value of surrounding properties will be diminished. And lastly, the one that gets you sometimes on a zoning variance is the kind of squirrely hardship ordinance, which says, you know, first you got to extinguish it. We're going with the standard A, not the no other possible use. This is the standard A in the statute that says existing conditions at the property distinguish it from others. We think we meet that standard. As Steve has pointed out, the building is somewhat functionally obsolescent. It's got, it doesn't meet code. It's got no elevator. It's not handicapped accessible. Most importantly, for the other permitted uses there, there's not enough parking. We've got 34 spaces, I think, now, and you'd need many more than that to do any other use realistically. So what we're really boiling down to is the other standard of that. There's no fair and substantial relationship between the purpose of the density formula and the proposed use in this particular instance. And here, again, we're talking a variance that would permit it sounds like a lot. We're going to permit 14 instead of the permitted 9 units. But again, the units are dwelling units, which can have anywhere from 2 to 5 people, mattering how they're laid out, whether they have kids. So we're talking very tiny, modest units. I think 14 of them will be a single resident, 400 square feet, 450 square feet, something like that. Only 2 of them will have 2 residents in them, so total you're going to have 18 people there, right? As opposed to what you could have, which is high 20s. As importantly, most of them won't be driving. I think there's 90-something people over at Sunrise Towers. Dick tells me that I think something like 33 have cars. There's plenty of ample parking there. We think the same thing will hold true here. Relatively few residents will have vehicles. There won't be a lot of traffic in that relatively tight site. And in any event, Steve has provided for adequate parking, which hopefully the planning board will approve if we get there. And lastly, there's really no impact on city services here because the housing authority is right nearby, provides a lot, and again, it's on an as-needed basis. So we think we more than meet the standards under the statute, and we would hope that the board could make those same findings and approve what we think is a a very beneficial use for that site. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
No, thank you, very, very complete. Does anybody have any questions of him before I close it? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I have a comment.
Yes.
The letter you mentioned from Robert Harriman,
Did I miss? Mr. Harrigan, I said, I thought.
Harrington.
Robert Harrington, yeah, it's at the bottom.
it wasn't in my packet.
Oh, I have a copy for it if you want.
I don't need a copy of it.
I thought it was included with his.
Yeah, it is,
Oh,
it
it
is
is,
here. It's
yeah.
in the, it's at the very
It's
back.
at the very
Okay.
end.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So are you okay? It's just a letter
No,
of support.
it's all
Okay,
right.
great, thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to add a couple things after the conversation that Dan had. We are adding green space in the back, and this area is here. This was all pavement, where I'm showing these green spaces now, which is gonna be added. And one of the things I did fail to say is that because the Housing Authority has this parking back here, if we get a high-intense commercial use in here and it doesn't meet the parking, even though I know the zoning allows you to occupy a pre-existing building without adding parking, it's gonna be an impact to this site, because they're gonna have to use these parking spaces if they don't have enough to support the uses in there. So it's very beneficial for the two properties to be working together.
Is there sufficient access back there for like emergency vehicles?
That's why we put this,
Oh, that's what that is? Okay.
which we've reviewed with the fire department.
Okay, great, super. Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, I'm going to open it up to the public. Is there anybody here from the public that would like to speak for or against this application? If so, please come forward at this time. There being that nobody came forward, I'm going to close the public hearing at this time and bring it back to the board for review. I have no problems with this
I
proposal.
have no problems with
I
it.
don't either. I think it's an excellent use
Good,
of the
good
building.
job, good presentation, very
Excellent.
complete. And it's a creative and a good, obviously, adaptive reuse of an old building in the downtown. So, with that, I will just ask the applicant if they have any final comments. I think we're,
I think we're all set. Thank you.
okay, thank you. All right. With that, I guess we'll just call for a motion, or would you be willing to do that?
Sure, you can
Great.
vote. I'd like to make a motion to approve application, oops, it's not on the top there.
Oh, yeah, it's not there, is it?
Where is it on my,
You got your agenda right there?
yeah. It's not stuck on, sorry. Application ZO 2017-0025, 423 South Main Street, a variance for density on the property, to install or convert the current commercial use building to a building with 14 one-bedroom and 2 two-bedroom units to be used as senior housing. The requested variance will not be contrary to the public interest. As explained and set forth in the application, it will actually be in the public interest to increase the availability of senior housing and the access of the seniors to assisted living care. The building itself will be renovated and brought up to standard, upgrading water and sewer and electric and adding sprinklers, and just generally improving the building itself so that it becomes more useful. The spirit of the ordinance is observed. The density requirement is to prohibit overuse of the property, but, and despite the fact that there's actually 16 units being proposed, they're small units, there'll be single dwellings, single occupants in the majority of them. Most of them won't have cars, so that it will actually be a less intense use of the property than if it was developed in accordance with the ordinance. Also, right next door is also senior housing, so that it keeps the same concept of the neighborhood uniform. Substantial justice will be done. As I said, it provides much-needed senior housing. It improves an old commercial building with the upgrades, interior and exterior in appearance. The value of surrounding properties will not be diminished. The improvements to the exterior and the increased landscaping and green spacing will actually improve the appearance of the property, which will increase the value of surrounding properties. The literal enforcement of the provisions of the ordinance would result in an unnecessary hardship. That has to do, again, with the overuse, the concept of overuse of the property. This, if we forced them to try to develop it as a commercial property, parking is insufficient, the building itself is not up to standard for commercial development. Developing it as regular apartments of 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom, large size, would also increase density, overuse of the property, so that if we forced the application of the ordinance as it stands, it actually creates a hardship. Anything else?
I think that was pretty complete, I think.
Okay.
I think we covered all the bases there. Did you have anything to add?
No, I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Okay, so your project is approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
I want to thank you for presenting a
Yes.
nice, complete application.
It's good to see Steve Smith.
Yes, it is, because you know it's going to be done beautifully.
Do you want this
Patrick was here for this?
colored elevation, or?
You know, I was wondering why he was here.
Why,
Yeah.
Patrick, you came
I'll use it at the planning board. Because that's our next stop. But thank you very much.
Good luck.
Steve.
Good luck. Okay, our next application is 21 Morris Ave. Is there anybody, whoever's here representing, please come forward. Introduce yourself.
Good evening. My name's Larry Trombetta. I'm a general contractor from Meredith, and I'm here to represent the Cots.
Okay, before you start, I just want to procedurally, I know that you came here tonight thinking that there was going to be a 4-member board, and I think you were warned about that. And then here we are with 3 members.
Exactly.
Which means that all 3 of us have to vote in favor of your project. So I'm going to give you the option of delaying one more time until there's 5 members here, or, because all 3 of us have to say yes. If one says no, your project won't pass. So, versus if there were 5 members here.
Right.
So
I understand.
it's, you know, it's
Quick
totally
question.
up to you.
If for some reason this does not pass tonight, can they bring it up again at another time?
No.
You cannot. Okay, I think I'll defer again then.
I mean, does that make sense? I mean, Dean, am I doing the right thing here?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
I mean, we cannot guarantee there'll be 5 members here in
We can't, but there's going to be a
January.
better chance that there will be.
Absolutely.
But 3 is got, you know, when there's
It's
3
gotta be
members
all-
here, it has to be
everybody's
all
gotta
of
be,
us.
Exactly.
And if it's the least bit controversial, something happens, you never know. So
Sure.
I just wanted to make sure that
Well,
you were okay.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I think, yeah, I'll defer till next
We
month.
can wait another month?
Sure. There's no rush.
Okay.
Okay.
Super.
And so it's the 16th, I think it was?
16th, and
Tuesday?
you'll be, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, 7 o'clock.
Okay, yep. Thank you very much.
I live at 15 Morris. I'm a butter.
We're not going to hear
We're
the
not
hearing
hearing it.
tonight, so we can't accept your
Now,
testimony.
this is the second time they cancel.
Well, it's not their fault, it's our fault.
Oh,
Sorry. It's not their fault. They've been here and they've been willing to be heard, but we have not had a sufficient board. There've been just issues, and so we cannot hear it. You know, we have to give them the option of putting it off another month. There's nothing we can do. And it's not his fault, it's our fault.
okay. So can I get a document for the date that it's going to be held?
It's going to be Tuesday, January 16th. And he'll give you something. You have a piece of paper you can write it on?
He's going to give them a list of dates.
Okay, good.
Some of the objections here,
Yeah, we can't do anything about that. No,
I
we've done.
did check the deed.
I know.
to Make sure that there wasn't a deed of
I know,
viewings.
I know.
So it's just 98 August Park left.
Yeah.
And there's no hearing for that, so. Yeah, there is, but they're not allowed to speak.
No.
Okay. All right, so the last thing on our agenda tonight is a 98 Pogus Park Road, a request for a rehearing. And I'm just going to let the planning director just go, this is not open to the public. We're not accepting any public input for this request for rehearing. This is totally an administrative issue at the board level. So I'm sorry, but if you're here for this, you're not going to be allowed to speak or participate. So just to make that clear. And I would just turn it over to Dean. And
So as the board will recall, fall of 2016, you had a request for the variance originally, and then within the statutory 30 days, you had a request for a rehearing, which you granted. And then at the next meeting after that one, there was a couple of delays. In the early part of this year, you had the rehearing, granted a variance again. And as far as the board thought and staff thought, that was the two opportunities for the board to consider and reconsider the case, and we felt that then the next step would be Superior Court if they chose to go that route. The court has ruled that the two decisions were based on two different criteria. So therefore, the court has decided that as opposed to a straight rehearing in the early part of this year, that really, under the law, constituted a second request. So therefore, the abutter should have had a 30-day period to appeal back to the board again, which the court has decided that that would be the case. They made that decision at the end of October and gave the applicant 30 days to apply to the board for a rehearing, which they did within that 30-day period. And you have the briefs from the abutters as to why they feel they should have a rehearing, and you have a brief from the original applicant of why they feel you should not grant a rehearing.
okay. I don't think anything has changed. I think the board went through and, made their decision, and I think you participated in that one. And personally, I don't see any need for us to rehear this application.
I didn't see any new evidence. It was a representation of everything that we've already been through. And I didn't see any new evidence. I don't think that we erred in our judgment this time.
I agree. I read every page of this rebuttal, and I found nothing new.
No.
It was well presented.
Yes, but
Right, but it's the same thing, and
It's
if
the
it came
same
back,
thing.
it would be
Right.
the same issue, and you've already been through it, at length, and it's a deck on Pogus Park Road, so with that, I'll make a motion to deny the rehearing based on the conversation that we just had.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So, motion denied? Okay.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Two.
Okay, that brings us to adjournment. Just one.
Any other business?
Any other business? Did you guys want to bring anything up? Just one thing in January is our organizational meeting. So,
Yes, and we have one person that's in the process of going through the city council appointment process to be an alternate, and we have, I know,
yeah, but you
at
won't.
that moment when you thought the earth actually stood still for a moment, that was that moment. They filled out the application. We have a second person, lo and behold, who is
Really?
also going through the process, but will be delayed a little bit. So we may have two alternates
Wow.
That would be
at some
nice.
point in
That
time.
would
It would be
really
nice,
nice,
yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
And Steve will be back next month. He had a death in the family, which is unexpected, so. So anyway, just for purposes, we just elect a chairman and a vice chairman.
Correct.
And secretary.
Yep.
So if that, I guess you stick that at the end of the agenda. or at the beginning, I don't know. I don't know where it goes on the agenda. Seems like every year in January, we forget to do it, so we
The
always
other
end up.
business?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess that would be under other, we'll put it under other business.
yeah, we can do it at the end of the meeting.
Yep, okay.
So just
Will do.
to keep us honest and whatever. So unless there's anything else, motion to adjourn?
Will we adjourn?
Yay. Seconded? All right. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
We'll see you in 2018. That's my ride, by the way, so he just has been decided.
Figured he had a reason for being
I
here.
know, like, nobody comes to these
No,
meetings.
but
and-
who was sitting there so dedicated in the back? Really? Dog is gonna be stunned to have me
He
home
just
this early.
decided to come with